Good morning, and welcome to Issues That Matter. And as I normally say, we have a good show for you today. It's going to be jam-packed with information. We're fortunate enough to have one of our Democratic gubernatorial candidates on, and I'm honored to say that she's a return guest, Donna Dion. Donna, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I enjoy coming to this.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment.
It is.
Oh, thank you very much.
Compliment.
So how are things going on the campaign trail?
Well, let me tell you, there is no dust settling on us. We're moving from forum to forum, and whenever I have an opportunity to talk to a group, I'm out there. So we're busy. I'm going to say sometimes 7 days a week, because we've been doing things right through Sundays. So, and it's going to lead us all the way, I think, to the weekend before the elections. The only thing that we haven't booked is Monday and Tuesday of the week of the election.
What surprises have you run into?
The questions are pretty consistent across the whole state of needs, but I think the reality of driving through or walking through communities is getting to know what their actual employment statuses are. You know, manufacturing is diminishing, places are closed. You know, what people are doing, entrepreneurship, new businesses. The people are looking for an answer. They're looking for somebody. There is a lot of participation at, even if it's just me meeting Democrats in the county or me going to a forum with the other 6 candidates, there's a lot of interest, a lot of people sitting out there listening and staying and asking questions afterwards. It's a very alive election. You know, people wondered what would happen after, you know, we did the presidential, would everything die out? It isn't. I think people are interested in seeing where the state's going to go and who's running.
For those viewers that might not have their historical background on a person such as yourself, you were mayor for the city of Biddeford. How many terms did you serve?
I served for 3 terms, each 2 years, so 6 years altogether, from 97 to 03.
Yep.
And Biddeford, though, people don't realize, is the only community in the state of Maine that as soon as you become mayor, you also become the chair of the school committee. That doesn't exist anywhere in the state.
Why do you think that is?
It was something that was decided on by the charter in Biddeford forever. And at times they talked about change. I think it's a great bridge for me. I think it added to the ability to negotiate budgets and put 2 volatile groups together and be forced to sit at a table. Because if you had it differently, you wouldn't necessarily say, I want the business manager and the city manager sitting there, and I want the finance people from both of those groups. So you might have the superintendent and the city manager and 2 business managers from both sides of the city, the school side and the city side, talking about the same dollar. Before we even go before, you know, a council or a school board and try to do something, we can make decisions on where the money's at.
What do you see as in the world of education? What do you see as the challenges that they face today?
Well, I think there's too many mandates, unfunded mandates, and as a result, the required documentation that has to be there with the standards, educational standards that have been put upon them, I think we take away from actually the educational process. People are so focused on, I need to follow these mandates and I need to make sure these things happen. I think education has to be making sure you're transferring information over to those students so that in turn they have the best opportunity in the future to be successful. And so we have standardized testing, and I, for one, am a lousy tester. Now, I have information, and if people wanted to sit there and ask me about stuff, I could go on and on. But if you're sitting there and you're under the pressure of testing, sometimes they get derailed, and it isn't necessarily a true picture of someone's performance.
The analogy that I would make is when I go into a voting booth, and there are issues on the ballot that I have to make a decision on, and I read the issue, and I say, okay, I read it. I'm a fairly well-educated individual. I think I understand what it's telling me, but I can't say that I'm certain. I really don't know what it is asking me about. Do you see the same thing happening in the educational world?
I think so. I really do for some students, because there's always been a different learning style. And when we were in school, well, at least when I was in school a long time ago,
We don't want to go down that road.
no, but I think you looked at it, and they said the basic things were, and it's funny, they used to say reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Yep.
And nowadays there is so many source of information that you can go to, that if you had those basic skills and the ability to research it, you in turn are supporting your educational process. And everybody learns differently, as I indicated. So we're losing out by derailing people and saying, okay, now you have to memorize all these things, and let's see how much you remember and put it on paper.
Well, when I look at the educational system and what I hear is going on, I don't get any firsthand knowledge. It almost sounds like education has turned into indoctrination, which I am abjectly opposed to. But that's for another day.
Well, I think I'm hoping we go back to education being a challenge for each individual and giving them the ability to succeed in those challenges, whatever levels they are, so that the future has something that will be available for them as options.
And I would like to see more control being done on a local level. Mm-hmm. Less coming down from the state, less coming down from the federal, and having local people make decisions. That's the way this country was founded. That's the way this country grew up to be the power that it is. Why change the mode after we've hit the successful? We've been successful. Why change it?
Absolutely.
There will always be problems. There will always be concerns. You're never gonna have any type of world that does not have problems and concerns.
Yeah, well, what they did in the educational process when they said no student left behind, and they did the performance standards, they provide that here to the teachers who are the ones who are the frontline individuals who understand each student, but they need to perform based from over here, those people who don't see the students that are being addressed and the success rates of those students. And you're absolutely right. It has to be, I go in a classroom, I have to prove that I'm a qualified teacher. I have a performance level I need to have. But at the same time, my success is getting every one of those students to be successful. And that's how we should be looking at it. We need to not be holding back. We shouldn't make these students feel inferior. We shouldn't make them feel that they're failing. They're just addressing their educational system based on their abilities and their interests and making those connections for those individuals. They become our future labor force. They become our future teachers and whatever else. But we're making that so much harder now.
Yes, and I fear to think that we're going further down the road of trying to fit square pegs into round holes.
Absolutely.
Which does nobody any good. But let's get off the topic of education for a little while, and let's talk about infrastructure. Mm-hmm. The infrastructure, not only in the state of Maine, but nationwide, the infrastructure is arguably falling apart. Mm-hmm. Where do you see the state of Maine going relative to the infrastructure? How do you see it? And where do you see it going in the future if you would become governor?
Well, I think we need to review our funding sources. I mean, we've made a lot of changes on the state level of revenue sharing, which was assisting a lot of municipalities in some of their structure. And if we continue just doing everything in bond issues and not looking at any breathing room in order to insert additional revenue, we're going to eventually be taking our budgets and just paying our monthly or our yearly annual payments and never catching up with what we have to do because infrastructure has to be updated on an ongoing basis. So we need to do some capital expenditures here, and we have to be hard-nosed about how do we prioritize these things. And I think the evaluations on the state level, and we'll hold it to the state of Maine because that's where I want to be governor of. So I think if the prioritization of looking at our bridges, The health and safety of communities is also inclusive of any roads and bridges that we're crossing. But the infrastructure is so much more than just roads and bridges, and that's what people are focused on. We need to repair these. I mean, and I, for one, since January, the traveling and attending and getting signatures and now doing forums have gone over lots of roads from Machias to Farmington, Millinocket, or actually as far as Fort Fairfield. The roads are in desperate condition, except for 95 and 295, which is being maintained. But the bridges going over these roads are those things that we're looking at, and they need major repairs, and you're seeing some of that's happening. And there is some road construction going on in lots of places, because I've seen that also.
I live in Kennebunk, and some of the roads in Kennebunk, especially at the close of winter, because of the frost seas and all that. And
yeah.
One has to wonder why haven't they developed a better methodology of paving roads, something that's going to be more impervious to freezing damage?
There must be some research and development out there, but I guess the bituminous industry would have a problem if we stop, and as a result, it lasted 20 years instead of 2 years or 3 years to do that. It would be an industry that would really be impacted immediately. But I think I never thought about that, but you're right. There's an impact.
Repairing roads is an industry.
Absolutely.
And it employs a good number of people.
Right, and machinery. And I mean, you think about it, you go down the line, you're going to see a lot of people that are impacted by that.
Good point.
But the thing is, we need the money in order to do that, which keeps these people in business anyways. But and we should be, because I mean that's really important. But I think on a local basis, we need to be working more closely with the cities, making sure that they do capital expenditures. I know during that short 6-year period, there was no capital budgets in Biddeford, and we started prioritizing how the roads were being done in Biddeford. And so you had a set dollar amount. That set dollar amount was part of the base of your taxes that you had. So every year you could take that money, because you got it again, and you paved those roads. Now we're going to pave these roads, and you develop a process. The state has to do something similar to that. We need to look throughout the state in the weakest areas and prioritize them and get them done, but establish a system so that you have a set dollar amount that keeps going there. And how do we maintain that infrastructure, the obvious infrastructure?
How do you think that would work with the legislature?
Well, I think you have to, first of all, the intent is I have to set a tone. I have to set some directions. I have to pull the individuals together to realize that I respect where they're coming from. They're elected to represent a certain area in Maine. And there is some individuals that have been long enough in Augusta that they have the system down. They figure out it's about time to how do I make my proposal so the state roads that are in our community get paved, and I think we all have to have an equal platform in doing that. We need to look at the whole state and look at high traffic areas and not high traffic areas, and make sure we're paving those, and we're not just providing patches, and the frost heave comes and the whole patch seems to be relocated, and we lose vehicles in the process. But I think people who have new representation don't necessarily looking at infrastructure when they get to Augusta. I think we need to establish a discussion point where we're talking to everybody equally about where the needs are and why the needs are, and evaluate the needs and figure out where the money's going, so that everyone is at a solid base, where their infrastructure, if in comparison to other communities, are totally destroyed. And they say, well, because I'm in a rural area, I don't count as much. I think we need to remove that stigma. It's big cities, big location, more pressure, they get more money. I think throughout the state there has to be an equal view of what is important, and we have tourists all over the state. It's a big industry, so our infrastructure makes a big difference. Some individuals who may want to relocate here as a business, our infrastructure is important. So we can't prioritize based on, oh, you're so many miles away in the state of Maine, that who wants to travel there? I think there is resources everywhere, and part of the selling point of anything is our infrastructure. You know, what do we have? Easy access, can get to, can have a business. I mean, that's one of the things. I think our infrastructure doesn't just exist on roads and bridges. I think we have to look at our infrastructure as all the resources that we have and maintain them. And one resource that we don't have a very good handle on is broadband in our state of Maine.
Yep.
And I know 8 years ago, because when I tried to do this before, one of the things that I had on my list was broadband, and I had spoken to a couple of industries, and one actually in Rochester, New York at that time. Since then, I redid some investigation recently as running this time to see what they could do. They had been trying to get into the state of Maine over 10 years ago with establishing broadband and trying to make communications a major issue here, so that we could establish businesses throughout the state and everyone was better connection. Because lots of companies would love to come here. Why not? Maine's got so many great resources. So that's part of our infrastructure, is looking at broadband, sophisticated broadband, so no matter where businesses wanted to relocate, they'd have that ability for communications.
And with my involvement with the MS Society, I know broadband is a factor that the MS Society is very concerned about, or lack of broadband, because
Absolutely.
we're a very rural state, and with the way things are developing in the way of technologies, much can be done over the broadband. Much can be done over the phone. Mm-hmm. If you have the broadband in order to be able to handle it.
Absolutely, and I classify that as a major part.
And that, in some cases, that will be the only way that a person can access it, because they live too far away from any hospital.
Right, and think about the number of businesses who could just work at home, okay, and employ other people in their businesses who also work at home.
Well, that's a big thing. I spend more than my share of time on the internet. And you can't be on the internet for very long at all before you start getting bombarded with work-at-home opportunities.
Absolutely, but
some of which I'm sure are very legitimate, many of which are pie in the sky.
And if we live in in certain locations of Maine, you don't have any interruptions. But then you have those people that could be even in our area, in low riding areas, even in Biddeford and Saco, you could be in a dead zone. And your signals may not be as fast. The process would be
Yep.
slow. I mean, having digital, ability, broadband would just change the whole face of industry in Maine if we just actively marketed our need to have companies come here and start making proposals and start looking at what they can do and looking at the expansive land mass that we have.
What do you see are the steps that the state would have to take in order to increase the attractiveness of coming to Maine?
Oh, I think we need to be the marketing people. We need to be marketing everything that people could be doing here by the resources in each community. But how does that happen? Each community has to step up to the plate. One of the things I've been pushing as a candidate is I'm one person. And if you expect me to provide miracles in this process, it's not going to happen. But if we're willing to I'm not on a testing phase. I'm on an active phase. And the active phase means I need key individuals to step up to the table. And every community is different, so one size doesn't fit all. So when we're doing this, what are the needs? What are your resources? What are some of even the landscaping? Why not have a business here looking at this? Why not have a business here and enjoy this? Work here during the week and enjoy this on weekends, people have to say, how would my life be better? We all have to work. Most of us all have to work. And in that process, why don't we have that as a benefit? If you come to Maine, it's a 4-season state. And so highlight those things. But we're lacking key issues, the broadband thing, key issues to say you could live or work anywhere here and communicate. It's the same thing as transportation, the train system. You know, how do we make it easier to get through the whole state? You know, how do we, trucking and routes and
in a state as vast as Maine, and I'm one who thinks that the globe that we used to learn on in school,
yes.
You look at the state of Maine on a globe and it's this little speck, and the size of the state of Maine is totally misrepresented, because our state is a huge state.
Massive.
We have a lot of square mileage.
Yeah. You know, you go from getting in Kittery and going all the way to Fort Kent, you better have a whole day, planned.
Yeah.
Because it's going to take you 6 to 7 hours. I used to leave Biddeford, and we live a short period of time in Rochester, New York, and it would take us 8.5 hours. I could do that in the state of Maine.
People lose sight of the fact that when you compare the square mileage of Maine and the square mileage of a state such as Massachusetts,
oh, yes.
The view in people's mind is that Massachusetts is a bigger state. No. Massachusetts doesn't come close to the size of the state of Maine.
No. And I think, so as a result, it's one Maine, which is a big thing that this governor has to market. It's one Maine. It's not 2 districts. It's not Southern Maine, Northern Maine. It is one Maine. And so we need to equally look at all the assets that everybody has and look at how we can market them all. And because sometimes I found in my travels during the campaign, I have lots of locations where I have lots of employees, but there isn't enough jobs. And then I have other locations where they are forever looking for employees. Now, it would be easy to say, hey, everybody move over here. But that's not the situation. People like where they live. It's beautiful where they live. So how do we establish more businesses where those people are? And how do we have them work with us to establish those entrepreneurialships? What small businesses are there, and are they willing to expand? So what incentive do I have to assist them, be it training programs, for them to expand and hire more individuals, and that area starts to flourish? In the areas where people are looking for, well, obviously, I need to be encouraging the new workforce to be located there. And once again, we're talking about training and development. And in encouraging those businesses, they say, gee, I'm forever making an investment, and it costs me $3,000 or $30,000 a person because I train them, I start them, it doesn't work, or whatever else. But if we had a base, and then I could be focusing on higher wages, I could be making incentives. So the state of Maine has to be working with businesses, educational institutions, internships, entrepreneurs, local locations, resources that you have. And how do we put that together? So now you're a specialty area. What
ideas do you have in that regard?
Well, I talked to some of the universities, looking at some of the things they're currently doing with research and development, looking at the training programs they're having, looking at internships, paid internships, so that we keep the individuals coming out of college and actually placing them in jobs, in businesses. And so we're making an investment in them. And so the younger generation is just not going for something they think that's going to be interesting and challenging and moving out of the state.
You think that the budget in the state of Maine would allow that?
I think if we look at all our economic development that we do, I think it would be a collaboration. Would the state handle the whole thing? I think it's a regional, and it's sort of a municipality, a county, and a state. And I think doing a collaboration of all of us, looking at things that work, and in encouraging the colleges, Because what's going to happen if we are helping individuals get a job as well, we're preparing you for that. It's also a hook for the colleges to get more people coming into the state going to school here.
You just gave me an entendre, the hook. Maine has one of the industries in Maine that is very large, and we are a coastal state, the fishery industry.
Yes.
Commercial fisheries is very important.
Absolutely.
Throughout the state, not just in Portland,
No.
not just in South Portland, but throughout the state. Mm-hmm. What do you see the future being for the commercial fishing industry?
Well, I think we have to be looking at, because because of the monitoring and the regulations and the laws and climate change and what it's done, and the depleting of some of the levels of different kinds of fish and whatever else, I think that is like every problem that we have, it's not a single answer. Everything is so comprehensive. And looking at all the investments that some businesses are doing to keep the fishery industry going, we need to be doing some investments above and beyond that. Just monitoring is working with the fish, and we are. There's all these associations saying what is the level of fishing that can be done. There's an industry that is made up of years and years of people who have been in that industry, and they're the first-hand individuals. It's like making regulations, and we do include the people, but they're not the major determinant of what the restrictions and how we're going to limit their ability to fish and have enough product to be selling. So I'm going to say up front, my limited information that I have worked with in getting to know the fishing industry indicates I need more input from the actual frontline people on their recommendations. The easy suggestion is just keep fishing, and then your catch every day just gets lower and lower and lower, and you get out of business.
So now you're going to exhaust.
You're going to exhaust it, right? And so the process in monitoring and controlling it is by working with those individuals so that they inform us of what's going on. Also, we have so much competition. So we're trying to monitor and control the catch they have. But then we have other countries who are coming in similar waters and catching. So we have like a dual problem here, So that's why I said every time I go one more step, I get more into mud than I do into solid ground in the fishing industry. I know that there is a lot of ability for financial support to those individuals. And I looked at just minimal stuff, not from the state. The state does more regulations than support. That's not an industry like they do block grants, like we do for other economic development situation. I want to look at that. I mean, we, on solid ground, just because they're out in the ocean, it makes it different. But on solid ground, for me, what I was trying to do, and every time I looked at that, because people ask questions, is if you have a building, I'm doing economic development. If you have a boat, I'm handling fishery. Well, that's economic development over there. And when you're on solid ground, the point and as I said, with my minimal stuff that I've done, and it's only been, I'd say, within probably the last 30 days that those things seem to be questions and asking, that I'm seeing that we have like block grants and we have tax incremental financing, we have pine tree zones. On the business, solid land business, it's different, and we need to develop some kind of aggressive approach also on the fishery side. How that's done, as I said, is pulling those people who are frontline people into the process. And there's all kinds of fishery talking about, catches and amounts and limitations and livelihoods and revenue. And everything I just said it probably doesn't make sense, but I look at it as a big picture. And somehow, some of the things that we've done for some businesses have to be done for the fishery industry also, to encourage them, an incentive. But at the same time, it's like farmers and blueberry pickers, and what do we do with their crops, and if they're doing well or not doing well. I need to figure out how, because we don't want to lose that industry, but at the same time, how do we get them to be in a lucrative ability?
How do you get them to behave in a more responsible fashion?
Right, and also
without having to pass a law to regulate what they do.
You're right. There has to be, or there has to be accountability. But, and because I had not been in anywhere in that industry, I do not have any background in it, so I can't pull from, I worked with individuals. So everything I have done is by talking to somebody and then going and trying to find, what have we done someplace else, and how can we do it here, and how can we make, it's sort of like I have silos of all kinds of things going on at the same time, and then trying to fill the right people into those silos to say, we need the best information, and how do we pull the frontline people, as I keep saying, to the table, so that we can say, okay, we did this, and how can we also assist them, and how can they go forward and continue in their industry and be very effective. Okay. If that all makes sense.
Okay. Well, now we're going to cover something else.
Okay.
The clean election.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I tried to be a clean election candidate, obviously, and during my time I focused on signatures, passed out papers as I was collecting signatures. So I was not successful in getting the 3,200 required $5 signatures. So I'm a traditional candidate working, as I call it, within the parameters of the clean election, because I am a clean candidate. I'm not a clean election candidate, if that makes sense. But I, excuse me, but I did learn something in this whole process, that as governor and someone who's not financially attached to PAC or special interest money, or anybody that has a lot of money, we don't have something with the clean election process, is there's not a transitional thing. Say you didn't get 3,200, but you got 25% of that. The person who got 3,200, which was my goal, 3,200 $5 contributions, they immediately got $400,000. During the time they were collecting signatures, they were also able to collect seed money up to $200,000. The $400,000 was minus any seed money you had left. But I can tell you, anybody who was making clean election took care of all their seed money, and they bought everything they could buy prior to doing the final qualification. And that's the process, and I'm not arguing that process. I'm just making sure we don't direct somebody in the wrong direction. So anyways, they got the $400,000. For individuals like myself, where maybe I would have got 25%, I could have got $100,000. That would be great. I can actually do a campaign much less than that. I already know that. But there's no happy medium to encourage people to at least get a portion of that. I evaluated what was going on with legislative people or people in the Senate, how many signatures $5 signatures they needed and how much they were getting. So if I only had to have 150 signatures and get $24,000, that would have been great. But I needed 3,200, and if I didn't get it, I got zero. So it's hard to be a clean election candidate unless you really have like for governor, a whole crew of people behind you focused on that. I've
never been a numbers person, and just hearing you talk about it tells me this is a very confusing world.
This is a clean election. Being a clean election candidate, it requires as much work as it required for me to get my signatures to be on the ballot, equal to that. But once you get into the process and you have a system, you can actually be extremely successful. I have to give, one of the candidates, Democratic candidates, is very successful, and I applaud her for her successes. She is now entering, she did her 3,200. She reached her next X 800, so she got another 150,000. She's working for her next 800 $5 individual signatures, and she'll get another $150,000. So, I mean, it can be, you know, this is to get big money out of politics. But at the same time, it still doesn't, the option is there for anyone to do it. But in some situations, it's extremely difficult. This is the first year that any candidate, and we have a Republican, we have a Democrat, and we have an independent, were all successful in getting their $3,200 $5 signatures, and I acknowledge that, praise them. That is great. But some of us, you know, trying to do both things didn't work out that way.
I wonder whether it will ever be possible to get big money out of politics. Because the big money is always going to be there. The only question is, what are they going to be spending it on?
Absolutely. I mean, big money can still do their own thing, because you don't have to give it to a candidate. They can still do their own thing. You know, my opinion, and looking at all the money that's expensed here, I think there should be a limited level of how much money you can spend on your campaign. Not where you get your money, but a limitation to what you...
I had never really thought about that, but my first impression would be, that makes some sense. Now, what I will think about, if I think about this continuously for the next 10, 15 minutes, I might be able to come up with reasons why I would not want to do it.
But if they
but
say,
at least superficially, it sounds like a reasonable idea. What do you think the chances are of ever being able to sell that to?
I don't know. I mean, going through this clean election process made me do a lot of thinking about that. That's where I said, well, wait a minute. I think we're doing this in reverse. So if you can make $5 million, you're going to do that. Well, they said, well, that gives you an unfair level of competition because you might be the good candidate and you have no money. So now I'm looking at all of these candidates and I'm saying, you know, there's a few of us that are really lowly, very limited funded candidates, and we're very good candidates. But does that mean that we have limited chances of winning? And I said, well, wait a minute. Then I think we're looking at it backwards. We should be saying that everyone has a goal, and during the primary election, the maximum that you should have is, I don't know, let's say 300,000. I mean, I haven't thought it through that much. Everyone, you can make up to 300,000, you know? So individuals on a traditional may have
it's churning around in my mind, and I could see some advantages to doing something like that. Don't limit the amount of money that the campaign can bring in. Limit the amount of money that the campaign can spend, and that would breed an attitude that would enhance the effective use of the monies. And what else would we need, or how much good would that do to have a governor or representative or a state senator, or if at the national level, a senator or even the president, if there was a limit as to how much they could spend, and whether or not they're going to be successful is going to be dependent upon how effective they utilize the monies that they use.
Absolutely. You know, because I looked at it and said, it's not how many mailers you're going to get with my face on it. It's going to be the message that I'm trying to portray. And so it's me doing these kinds of things. It's me going out there and shaking some hands and actually talking to people and addressing their individual concerns. That's what the marketing is. And I know it gets harder and harder. I'm looking at it as a governor in the state of Maine. You know, when I'm done, I will have hit every county. I have touched some individuals, done some for them, and utilize every free opportunity I have. So when Channel 5 or 10 calls me and says, we want to do an interview, You schedule it, I'll be there. You know, there's going to be forums all over the state. You schedule it, I'll be there. It's not about what I'm passing out, which we do. We still pass out stuff when we're there. It's the impact of who that candidate is, and right now it's driven by how many signs am I going to have on the side of the road, and how many advertisements, and if I wasn't so poorly funded, maybe I wouldn't have thought about this as much as I had. But we talked about it, and they said, "Well, Donna, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going out there. They're going to see my face more often than they want. They're going to get to see the candidate." It's sort of me at Market Basket. You know, I want to be effective. I wanted you to know it was me that was out there. You know, and the same thing. So, I go to the mill area and I see people walking around and I introduce myself. That's me. I didn't have a representative that I'm paying their salary and paying for the literature. We're still paying for some literature.
Who might well be a professional at doing something like that.
Absolutely.
Which could give a misleading impression to the person that they're talking to.
Yeah. So I'm sort of rolling up my sleeves and doing what I need to do. But when I thought about it, I said, wait, the limitations need to be on what they spend. That's how I feel about the clean election kit.
Again, I never really thought about that, but superficially it makes sense. Now, that might be trouble for other people, because sometimes when I think of things superficially, I get it all wrong.
Well, I think, relating it back to the clean election, because there is some funds that have to be added to the clean election, because so many people were successful, that even there is limitations to how much you can get. But if you look at those amounts of what you get are substantial. And we're trying to get big money out of elections, but we're establishing a fund which might allow you to be big money. There's not a special interest in PAC money, but it also, they said if we took big money out of elections, then people would have more opportunity to run. And you're absolutely right. But the process to get there, or getting any financial assistance, it could hinder somebody being successful. If someone told me to get off my lazy rear end and do more door-to-door and collect your $5, which someone made clear in my Facebook, I said, I don't think some people realize the whole process, because I know the successful people have a whole organization that's actually got paid staff collecting those $5. And that person is, at every forum or whatever else, or any house party, they're saying, please, provide $5 and stuff. I'm not saying they're not, but it's a whole other industry that's happening here. And I, for one, just touched the edge of it and was unsuccessful, wanted to be successful. I would love to have received that $400,000 in my checkbook. But then provided me with other people who are going to be like me. They're not going to have all of those resources. They're going to have all those connections. And how can we still fund some kind of campaign to be successful? Because I feel I would be a big asset to the state of Maine.
Okay. A couple of months ago, I had an opportunity. I was asked if I wanted to guest co-host a show with Governor LePage as the guest. And we talked about LD 1406, LD 1406, which I suspect you know something about it. Mm-hmm. And for the viewers, that is a something that the governor is put forth to try and get the legislature to pass it, to modify the foreclosure process for elderly people, and this blew me away. When I heard what this was all about, it blew me away about what goes on. I never realized it.
Yes, I know that he handled somebody in Lewiston, because I remember following that process when that happened, and him talking about.
And what we're speaking of currently, and it's a town by town, city by city thing, and some towns and cities work with their with their taxpayers,
Yes.
to help them through the rough times.
Yep.
Others have to take a much harder approach, and it's those that I find to be morally reprehensible.
Absolutely.
What goes on.
Absolutely.
And for those of you who do not know what I'm talking about here, it is one of the few things that I do know what I'm talking about. But for those of you who do not know what I'm talking about, if you have an elderly person who is in arrears on their taxes, property taxes, I'll say, the town can, and they may have a $200,000 house, but they're $10,000 behind in their property taxes. The town says, we want that money, and if we don't get that money by such and such a date, we're going to foreclose. Mm-hmm. And if they foreclose, they then sell the house at the fair market value, may get $200,000, and they'll immediately take the $10,000 that was owed, and the other $190,000, I always thought the other $190,000 would go to the homeowner for his or her equity. Mm-hmm. But in certain situations, it's not done that way. In certain situations, the town or city takes that $190,000 and keeps it, leaving the homeowner homeless, which, again, to my way of thinking, that is morally reprehensible. It's insane that system ever saw the light of day. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, remember, mayor, for 6 years. So there were incidences, which I have to say that we worked very closely with individuals, but at a certain time, and we're talking about excessive amount of time, we worked usually with banks to see how we could handle that. So when this came up, I remembered instances that I ran into where we were working with people. And I looked at what Governor LePage was recommending, was to force everyone to work within some guidelines so that everyone would be sensitive to the individuals. And I know the bill is I think it's 65 and older, because you retire, they're looking at fixed incomes and stuff. And I think there's two dual things that are happening in this process, that the person that I know that sort of initiated this concern with Governor LePage, they mustn't have had a loan from the bank or something. I don't know, but everything foreclosed. Everything was not happening at the same time. Because I know when some people are in foreclosure because they're not paying their mortgage, they're not paying their taxes, and so there is a growing, obviously, debt that's occurring. And because if they're paying just the principal on their mortgage, I found in some situations banks were willing to pay the taxes to maintain a good status. So you never ended up with these liens on these properties and foreclosure, because it goes through a lien process, a notification process, and a foreclosure process, and they lose the property and it's taken over. And I think this is a great idea. It forces everyone to do all the proper notification. The final end product, after a period of time, is still the same. It's just the notification process that's changing. They can't just automatically do it. They have to work with the individuals. But it's being implanted in the same it's a longer term pre-planning process before you get to the formal lien foreclosure process.
I'm sure it's more complex than what I have.
Right, but it's a stepping process where they're trying to prevent those individuals who are in retirement, who are having some problems, giving them the opportunity to figure out if they have any assets, to be able to make all those other connections. Because some people are elderly, they don't know any different. There has to be that formal notification, that resource to work with you. Because some people don't own a penny on their home, and they could do a reverse loan, a reverse mortgage, and their taxes would be paid. And you're saying, well, that's kind of mean, but at the same time, they still have that equity that could be theirs.
I've had some very brief conversation with developers, with a developer. I shouldn't say developers, a developer, and I laid it out to him, and he said, well, they should have sold the house. I don't see that as being a logical assumption to make.
See, for me, I don't think they should sell the house, but I'm thinking if they have equity in their house, which could also assist them in getting financially stable. But what the city's doing is not automatically assuming I want your property. They're working with the individuals, and I think we need to be providing those individuals with the options of available to make that. Well, you have to give value back to that person. You don't want to diminish them.
From a city's perspective, or from a municipality's perspective, be it city or town, potentially, and I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody or any town or any city, but potentially they may look at it and say, you know what? We have a way of getting another $190,000 into our coffers.
Oh, yeah, right. Because I could foreclose you for you owing me $10,000.
Right.
Yeah, you're absolutely, and I could sell that property for $200,000. Absolutely, and that should not be the goal, and that's why I'm hoping this forces everybody to be looking at the individual so they're not losing the value of the house, but at the same time maybe encouraging them. When I'm telling, I don't want you to give me your house, but I really would like your $10,000 equitably, okay? But your house has no mortgage on it, okay? And a reverse mortgage, you could very minimally pay something, pay all your taxes, pay all your bills, and actually put a little pool of money there to assist you in your retirement, and you still live in your same house. I think it's a larger type picture. And yes, foreclosure does take the property for whatever you owe on the taxes, and yes, they would sell the property and whatever.
Okay.
That is and I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. But
I get that.
But the process.
And I think our viewers probably got that too.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you want to make the point again.
No. I just wanted to clarify that I can understand where the process is and why this ordinance, the bill was placed by Governor LePage.
What do you envision the tax structure to be like in the state of Maine, and have it be one that will foster growth and prosperity in the state?
See, which if you watch the debate on Channel 13, it's going to be kind of funny. Seven of us were there, and that question was asked sort of in a bullet, yes, no, are you going to do a progressive tax? And will the wealthiest pay larger amounts to pay for whatever that needs to happen? And I was dead center. I was number 4. So they went, yes, we're going to have a progressive tax. And they came to me and I just went silent. And I said, no, but I'm sorry, I'm not a yes or no type person. So it was kind of funny. It was Greg Lagerquist that I said, because as soon as you initiate any kind of tax burden to a certain level of income people, eventually it's not going to work and it's going to spread out and everybody gets hit and you're back to the same situation you were when you started doing this. You really need to look at comparables and fairness across the board. And raising taxes in certain areas or doing certain things is not my approach. It has to be what's the goal? What's the intent here? And at the moment, you're saying I don't want the individuals with lower incomes paying more, and nor do I. They already carry a burden because they don't have all of the exemptions that obviously businesses have. I'm more at looking at the whole tax process and saying, if I am a business owner, a well-to-do individuals, and I have a lot of money invested, God bless you, I'm not going to, say I'm going to make you pay more money because you got more money. I'm looking at, but you're able to to take 25% of your wages or 50% of your wages through exemptions, and your fair taxes is based on a certain thing. I want individuals to be equally able to leave maybe 50% of their wages untouched. We need to look at the whole tax structure. I think it's unfair. They just putting out specific percentages does not resolve. So we're going to collect another, I know I need 3%, so I'm going to collect another 3% from these guys because I know they got the money. I mean, we don't say, oh, you're at the gas tank and
now if I can interrupt for a second, now we get into the situation where I can tax them another 3%. Well, that 3% that 3% that you're taxing them might have gone into employing additional people had you not taxed them.
You don't know that.
No, you don't know that.
Absolutely, you don't know that. You're only going, we look at things on the basis of, okay, they seem to have a bigger pool of money, they have less money, or they're not, there's, where they're not paid adequately to the current living, affordable lifestyle or affordable living wages. And those things I see more controllable than us saying, I'm going to initiate another tax, And I mean, the big debate now, and I respect that, is that we knew how we were going to pay for the education to be at an average of 55% across the board. Because we were going to charge the wealthy, and that's how they say it, the wealthy an additional 3%. Well, we're all responsible for education, so I want to look at it and say, okay, but eventually that 3% that we're doing, is it going to be adequately covering it? Or later on, we're going to go back and say, you have to pay 10% of the educational thing. It's not resolving the problem. Sometimes I look at it as putting the Band-Aid thing. All right, I took care of it. I got 3% from there, but we haven't really resolved it.
When you take that Band-Aid off,
we're going to still have...
start bleeding again.
Yeah, and so I want to look at things and more long-term concrete things. It takes care of it for today, but does it really take care of it? And that's the same thing with taxes. Let's be progressive, and those people have a lot of money, so why don't we increase the tax rate over there? I think we should be making everyone pay a comparable amount of income taxes to the system to help Maine go forward, but based on what they're actually earning, so that that people have livable wages, which means I want business owners to pay more wages to these people.
And I tend to think that, and based on what has transpired, based on Department of Commerce, U.S. Department of Commerce numbers, when you look at the Trump tax cuts that took place, a significant number of people got jobs because companies have expanded their workforce with the money that they would have had to spend in taxes. They put it towards expanding their workforce, which created jobs. And that to my way of thinking, that's smart. I'm not a politician, but that just makes sense. Okay, so let's move on.
But let me answer the comment you just made.
Okay, that means that we're running short on time.
Okay, just know that the tax cuts that have taken place recently have not, and history has shown, has not been in effect long enough to be the reason for all the jobs. That's only my opinion, but it's based on history when you look at it. These were things that were growing as the economy was getting better. These tax cuts will hopefully enhance people's livable wages in the future, right. But I don't think we've even seen any impact from it because it is, for me, it's too early.
You will never see that with the immediacy that we might need to see it.
Right.
But historically, I would say that it likely will. In any event,
likely, absolutely.
We're running out of time.
This
Donna,
has been great.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much. I appreciate this.
Well, I appreciated you coming on the show again.
Thank you.
I think. In fact, no, I'm not gonna say I think. I know it was a good show.
Good, great. I enjoyed being here.
enjoyed having it. I enjoyed having a conversation with you. And folks, have yourself a great day, and we'll see you next week. Bye bye.